Hello again, humankind. Before I begin, in fond memories of one loved by so many, and mostly because, in his own words, in this he heard what he needed to hear. This one's for Wayne and all others like him. Good humans, imperfect, yes, and yet definitely not all bad, who still have things they need to hear from God that he's been trying to get them to hear. I pray that all of your ears will be opened right, and that what you hear blesses you and benefits your lives. Wayne, I trust your soul to God and look forward to seeing you and forever, my brother under God. Amen. Now it's time for some more second level revelations. This time of higher level spiritual truth is addressing another frequently asked concerning thought. Throughout our human history, we have wondered about a very basic concept. Some have wondered, why are we here? Some others have wondered, what's the point or meaning to life? And many have thought, what's all this about? It doesn't really matter how you ask the question. The answer is the same when it comes to the reason for our very existence. Ready for the real answer? Here it is, the utter truth that will skyrocket your understanding to the advanced level. We exist and are alive because we are supposed to be the living proof truth of how ultimately beyond glorious God and his power are. Seriously. And that's truly an honor beyond description. Think about all of this like intelligent adults, humankind. God created us and then gave us the free will to choose to be his or not be his. Keep in mind that if we don't belong to God, we belong to ourselves. When we choose to belong to God sincerely, then we choose to obey and trust him, doing our best to live our lives as he has said we should. If we choose not to belong to God, then we end up turning our backs on him and living our lives as we say we should. And we sincerely become our own creations. Any creation shows the creator of that creation, right? We all know that crappy creations show crappy creators, and that incredibly good creations show an incredibly good creator. Yet even though what I just said is basic common sense that really shouldn't have to be said, most humans do not apply this basic common sense to the topic of our very existence. Allow me to explain. When I say that we are creations, I'm talking about who we are as human beings. Our quality of self, so to speak. Our everyday lives are where we are created. And the choices we make here, along with the things we do, and how we choose to be towards God and other humans, are how we are created. When we live our lives by our own rules, we end up creating ourselves. And we become crappy creations, which of course means we become self-centered, prideful, angry, greedy, deceitful, hateful, lust-driven, harsh, cruel, cold-hearted, impatient. I trust that you all get the point. By becoming such creatures, we show that we are crappy creators, period. When we choose to live our lives belonging to God sincerely, then we choose to obey the rules he has given us regarding how we should behave and think as best we can. This leads to us being better quality humans, led by goodness and love and right ways of being come what may. As we do this throughout our lives, we are forged into the walking, talking, living proof of how wondrously glorious God's power is. Because only his power beyond description, power beyond any and all imagination, could be what keeps any human ever from being destroyed by life on earth and utterly demolished into a cold, hollow, heartless, evil thing, one that is utterly incapable of anything that is any kind of good for real. As God's creations, we let his love and good ways of being show through our actions as we daily live our lives here on earth. And this only applies to those of us who live our lives truly caring about how God says we should. Please note that throughout this video, I repeatedly use the word sincerely. Talk without walk doesn't count. Also, there are many who are gods and don't know it, and they spend much of their lives walking without talking. However, that counts, because God will get their attention in his perfect timing. Now, let me be very precisely clear on this point, humankind. God's glory, the proof of his power shown by us, is unshakable and unbreakable goodness and right ways of being. It has exactly nothing to do with money, showy shows, lustful, sexual anything, us looking good in the top line fashions, and or us having any of the hottest possessions. People living for any of those things are just living for their own glory, and who they are as human beings suffers for it. Get over yourselves, humankind. Reality check time again, and right in your face, for real. Focusing our lives on any of those pointless and ultimately utterly worthless garbage things always leads to us being less good humans. So no matter how much stuff we end up having, we become lower quality creations, just smelling ourselves too much and not realizing how much we make ourselves stink. Pay good attention here, humankind. To succeed at being the raw and real living proof of God's power, we must live our lives humble to God, staying as good and as right as we can by the standards set in His holy word. The Bible is our instruction book, and it explains how we are to live our lives, led by goodness and love and right ways of being. And always, first and foremost, in our hearts, we are to love God with everything we got. Of course, we are humans, and we will never do anything perfectly without fail. The best part of everything is that God knows better than we do that we will sometimes fail to behave right. That's exactly why Jesus had to be. God Himself, made as a human soul, like we are human souls, yet living His life on earth sinless and dying without deserving to, and asking for God's forgiveness for all of us. That's the only way any of us could be granted the grace and forgiveness of sin that we can never earn on our own. At those times that we do fail, we only need to simply and sincerely admit to ourselves and God and anyone else we sinned against where we went wrong, and asking for God's forgiveness, truly believing that He can and will give it at our request, as long as we are sincere in our request, and only because of Jesus' incredible sacrifice. After we confess, as a part of repenting, we must make sure that we do our best not to repeat our mistakes. Remember, if we don't care about repeating our wrong choices, then we aren't really repentant for them, are we? With all of that being said, we should always aim for no failures, so that they happen as little as possible, of course. In the book of Ephesians, chapter 4, Paul explains all of this. He begins it with, "Therefore I, the prisoner of the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling with which you have been called." Right there in verse 1, he is saying that since we belong to God, we need to live our lives with our self-standards at the highest level, because God's children must be the best that we can be. And how exactly are we at our best? Paul goes on to explain directly of how to do this correctly, with all humility and grace. In other words, we aren't all that, and that's okay. With gentleness, so make peace, not war, unless it's righteous by God to fight, and that's for extreme circumstances only. Bearing with one another in love, meaning that since everybody got their own ways to themselves that others don't necessarily like, you included, make sure that you check your irritations with others as much as possible. You'd want them to do that for you, right? Being diligent to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Okay, so maybe that one sounds like it's harder to understand, but it's not. That just means that we're on the same team as God's children. And since the enemy is very actively focused on dividing and destroying our team, be sure that you don't help him. And that's all it takes to rep right for God as we live our lives on earth. And for those who need this explained in more precise details, Paul does exactly that in the rest of the chapter. In verses 4 through 10, he clarifies that Jesus is God, and that we can only be blessed with God's forgiveness of sin because of Jesus dying in our place and conquering death by rising again. By verse 16, Paul explains that living by God's rules is what will truly grow us as humans, so that we are no longer like children. Obviously, none of us wants to spend our whole lives being childish. We all tend to have the goal of maturing high on our life list of priorities. And the detailed list of ways to do just that starts at verse 17. Don't live with futility of mind. In other words, stay optimistic. Don't live in darkness. Don't exclude yourself from the life of God. Don't be ignorant. Don't be hard-hearted. Don't be callous. You know, when you have the hard parts on the bottoms of your feet, calluses. That's dead skin built up. So this means don't be dead while you're still alive. Don't be indecent, meaning don't be inappropriate and or obscene. Don't rampantly sin every way that you can. Do be renewed in spirit, meaning let the Spirit of God refresh your soul. Do be renewed in mind, meaning don't let your memories and or mistakes trap you in the past. Do speak truth. God does not like liars, I promise. When you get angry, don't sin because of it. Do release your anger by letting it go. Yes, you have every right to your anger. And yes, you have every right to let it go too. Earn your way in life. Laziness is the root cause of every single sin there is. Don't be bitter. Don't be a loud and noisy person. Don't be wrathful, meaning don't live your life full of intense anger. Don't be malicious. Don't live your life intending to do harm. Do live as a forgiven child of love himself, meaning that as you go through life, be sure to keep showing sincere kindness, goodness, compassion, and forgiveness to others as much as possible. If you don't show those things to anyone, then why should God show those things to you? And especially, do not get mad at God, because you have to behave well as His, even though it's so damn hard to. Remember, God gives bliss forever to those of us who do not give up on doing this hard work. So, yeah, that's kind of a long list of do's and don'ts. Yet no one who is sane and intelligent can argue against any of those rules as good ways to be. Basically, keep it real, humankind. None of us are good all of the time. And not all of us are horribly evil. And without God's rules guiding our behavior choices and attitude decisions, we tend to drift more and more towards being horribly evil as we go. Just look at how our world has become. Point proven. And when you get to thinking that it's too hard to choose to live God's way because it's harder to keep doing than anything you ever dreamed of, just remind yourself that hell is 10 billion times harder than anything you could ever imagine. And keep in mind that even God knows that living by His rules isn't easy to do, especially in today's world. That's what grace is for. To be sure, no one speaking the God's honest truth ever said that any of this was easy to do in any way, shape, and or form. I know that I certainly never did. However, I do recall saying good and right, but easy? Not hardly. It is quite literally a lifelong process. Of course, easy is for the weak. Being a child of God is for the strong. The weak need not apply. And it's entirely worth the hard work and strength. Because not only do we become better quality humans when we sincerely live by God's rules, we also get forever with Him. So, if you want to live a successful life, then keep it real and keep it simple. Remember what actually matters. Overall, give God the respect that He is due as God, and live every day as His forgiven child of love. No matter what impacts us throughout our lives, we must never turn our backs on the ways of goodness and love and all of the other best traits that we inherited from our Divine Father. No matter the hurts we suffer, we don't let the damage break us. No matter the wrongs done against us, we don't let the anger that it causes twist us. No matter the losses we must endure, we don't let the grief consume us nor the bitterness become us. No matter how many or what kind of scars that life on earth cruelly carves into our hearts with all the worst that it assails us with, we never truly lose our strength to keep choosing the good and right and God, even though the wrong and bad and self seems so much easier. And regardless of how strongly we feel like life owes us the privilege of us getting to do and be whatever we want due to all the evil that we have been forced to suffer and survive through, so wrongly as far as we are concerned. When we get past ourselves and stay true to the path of love for God and other humans as much as possible, and no matter what, then and only then is it shown by us just how indescribably beyond everything God is. Pure, divine, glorious love. God is love, and love of God shows his children so radically different from how the world is. See, purpose of life on earth undeniably fulfilled by that. High and Holy One who is love, thank you, my King, for thinking me up and deciding it would be good to create me. Though I many times falter and fail, being too much focused on my own silly self, I know that you have never and will never stop loving me. And I know that no matter what our enemy uses life to attack me with, I have never and will never stop loving you, even if I often don't like this path. My fervent prayer, always and for all my days, if by my might, if by my very life, let me always show you to the world as best I can, my everything Lord of love. If nothing else ever be said of me, let it be said that I am yours.